So, Steven Universe. I've been thinking about why this show in particular works so well for a video like this, and I think it comes down to something the show does almost accidentally. It's built around gentleness. Not gentleness in the soft, saccharine way that some cartoons go for, more like the gentleness of someone who genuinely believes that most people are doing their best and deserve to be treated accordingly. That belief runs through every corner of the thing, and after a while it just sort of seeps into you. The lore is also quietly enormous, which is the other reason we're here tonight. If you've never watched Steven Universe, or if you watched it years ago and the details have gone a bit fuzzy, what you might not appreciate just from the outside is how much history is buried under the surface of what looks, at first glance, like a cartoon about a kid at the beach. There are thousands of years of backstory in there. A whole civilization, a caste system, a war, a cover-up that spans millennia, and then also episodes where the kid tries to make breakfast for his alien guardians and it gets possessed by a demon. The tonal range is something. Tonight, though, we're not doing a plot recap. We're not rushing through seasons or ticking off episode milestones. What we're doing is settling in with the world, the actual world, the history of Gem civilization, how the whole society worked, who built it and why, and what happened when one small diamond decided she didn't want to be part of it anymore. That decision, by the way, takes about 8,000 years to fully shake out, so we have plenty to talk about. A few things worth knowing going in. I'm going to be talking about the full series, all 5 seasons, the film, and the epilogue series. So there's no version of this where spoilers aren't involved. If that bothers you, honestly, go watch the show first. It's a good use of your time. But if you're here because you've seen it, or because you want to fall asleep to someone talking warmly about a fictional universe they clearly spent too long thinking about, then you're in exactly the right place. Also, if you haven't subscribed yet and you like this kind of video, long, calm, going deep on things that deserve a closer look, the subscribe button is right there, and I genuinely appreciate it. The show ran from November 2013 to January 2019 for the main series, then a film in September 2019, then an epilogue miniseries that wrapped up in March 2020. That's a pretty extraordinary creative lifespan for a cartoon, and it felt at every point like the people making it had more to say than they'd yet been allowed to say, which is a quality you can feel in the texture of it, even if you can't always name it precisely. The voice cast is also worth a quick mention while we're settling in. Zach Callison plays Steven with a kind of earnest enthusiasm that never tips into grating, which is harder than it sounds. Estelle, yes, that Estelle, the singer, voices Garnet, and it's honestly perfect casting. That specific combination of warmth and authority is exactly right for the character. Dee Dee Magnohall and Michaela Dietz round out the main crystal gems as Pearl and Amethyst, respectively, and both of them do things with those characters over 5 seasons that I think about more than is probably reasonable. Rebecca Sugar created and showran the whole thing, and the involvement of the creator across the full arc of the story is visible. There's a coherence to Steven Universe that comes from someone caring about where the story ends as much as where it starts, right? Let's start at the beginning. And the beginning in Steven Universe terms means starting with what a gem actually is. The first thing the show gives you is a set of 3 women standing on a beach, and you understand pretty quickly that they're not human, but it takes a while before you really understand what they are. The show is patient about explaining its own world, which I think is one of its best qualities. It trusts you to pick things up gradually rather than dumping a mythology lecture on you in episode 2. But we have time tonight, so let's actually dig into it. A gem is, at the most basic level, a gemstone that projects a physical body made of light. The body, everything you can see and touch, the hair, the face, the clothes, is essentially a very convincing hologram with mass. It can be damaged, it can feel pain, it can feel warmth and cold and texture, but it's not the real thing. The real thing is the gem itself, usually embedded somewhere in the physical form. Pearl has hers in her forehead. Amethyst has hers on her chest. Garnet. But we'll get to Garnet properly in a bit. She's a special case. What this means practically is that gems can be hurt, but they can't really be killed in the conventional sense unless the gem itself is shattered. If the physical body takes enough damage, gets poofed, the show calls it, the gem retreats into the stone to regenerate. They go dark, essentially. Just a gemstone sitting there, no projection, nothing. And then, after some amount of time, they come back out, often slightly different in appearance depending on what they were thinking about or working through while they were in there. It's a detail I think about more than I probably should. There's something oddly appealing about the idea of a form that can be rebuilt from the inside. You retreat, you take whatever time you need, and you emerge slightly changed. The show uses it to do some genuinely interesting character work. Amethyst regenerating as a slightly different version of herself after a difficult episode, that kind of thing. The gem also contains everything that makes that individual who they are, their personality, their memories, their sense of self. It's essentially a consciousness stored in a crystal, and the body is just the interface, which means that technically, a gem's physical form can change quite dramatically through shapeshifting. All gems can do it to varying degrees, but the core of them stays the same. I find that philosophically interesting in a way I can't quite put into words. The body is chosen, more or less. The self is not. Gems also don't eat, don't sleep, don't age once they have emerged. They can do those things. Steven eats constantly, and Amethyst once ate a whole bag of sour candy just to see what would happen, but they don't need to. Their energy comes from the gem itself. They're essentially self-sustaining. Each gem also has a weapon that manifests directly from their stone. Pearl summons a spear. Amethyst produces a whip with spiked ends. Garnet has a pair of gauntlets that fit over her fists. The weapons aren't carried. They're generated, pulled out of the gem like they were always there, because they were. It's an extension of who that gem is at their core, not something they picked up. There's something nice about that framing. Your capacity for protection is innate, not acquired. The show's creator, Rebecca Sugar, has talked about designing the weapon system partly as a way to make each character's fighting style say something about their personality. Pearl's spear is precise, controlled, elegant. She's a perfectionist. Amethyst's whip is chaotic and unpredictable and has a real, I'll figure it out as I go energy. Garnet's gauntlets are direct. She punches things. She's right. One more thing worth covering here because it's going to matter later. Gems don't have a gender in any biological sense. The show gives them she/her pronouns as a default. They present in humanoid forms that the human characters read as feminine, but gems themselves don't have the concept. They don't reproduce in anything like the human sense, don't have family units the way humans do, don't have childhoods. Every gem is created fully formed with adult level knowledge and capabilities, purpose built for a specific function. The idea of growing up, of changing, of being something other than what you were made to be, all of that is essentially alien to them, except for Steven. But again, we'll get there. The point right now is just this. These are mineral-based life forms from another world, and the more you sit with what that actually means, the weirder and more interesting the show gets. A species that projects its own body, that can rebuild itself from within, that exists as a kind of permanent consciousness housed in stone, and that was shaped from the very beginning by a civilization that decided what each of them was allowed to be before they even emerged. The show also suggests in quiet ways that the regeneration period isn't just biological repair. It seems to involve something like processing. Amethyst, after a difficult confrontation with her sense of self, emerges from her gem slightly different, same person, but the way she's holding herself has shifted. The form she projects when she regenerates reflects something about her interior state in a way that suggests the time inside isn't empty. It's working time. Whatever the gem does when it withdraws, it's not just rebuilding a body. Gems can also be pushed into regenerating through physical damage, which the show uses as a kind of dramatic shorthand. When a gem gets poofed in a fight, they're out of commission for however long they need. In the early seasons, the crystal gems regenerate relatively rarely because the stakes aren't high enough to force it. Later in the series, when the fights become genuinely catastrophic, regeneration cycles start to feel more significant, like something actually at risk. The weapons are worth a quick note too, since the show occasionally returns to gems whose relationship to their weapon is complicated, and in every case, that complication says something. Pearl's spear is controlled, graceful, and has to be maintained. She trains obsessively. Amethyst's whip is spontaneous. Garnet's gauntlets hit things with finality. The weapons are characterization, basically. And there's something about gem biology I find quietly interesting, which is that gems can't dream. Steven can, because he's human, and his dreams turn out to be narratively important. He visits other consciousnesses through them, shares experiences across impossible distances. It's one of the places where his human half is specifically an advantage, which the show balances carefully against the many ways his gem half complicates his life. Right, so Gem Homeworld. The best way I can describe the visual of Homeworld, if you haven't seen it, is this. Imagine a planet that was designed by someone who had never encountered the concept of organic life, found it faintly uncomfortable when they eventually did, and decided the solution was more geometry. Everything on Homeworld is angular and enormous. The architecture is scaled for diamonds, who are genuinely colossal. We're talking several stories tall. The color palette is cold. There's a specific kind of loneliness to it that the show renders really beautifully. This vast, perfect, airless place where everything is exactly as it should be, and nobody is really happy. Which is probably by design, come to think of it. Homeworld society was built around a single, organizing principle: perfection. Every gem has a type, determined by the gemstone, and that type determines everything. What you do, where you live, who you're allowed to associate with, what you're allowed to become. There's no movement within the system. A pearl doesn't get to decide she'd rather be a soldier. A ruby doesn't get to explore other callings. You are what you were made to be, and that's the end of it. The caste system has the diamonds at the absolute top, then pearls, who function as a sort of prestige companion class. Beautiful, decorative, skilled, and entirely subordinate to whoever they serve. Then various kinds of quartzes, who are warrior types. Sapphires, who are rare and valuable because they can see the future. Rubies, who are common soldiers, often deployed in groups. And on down, from there, through peridots and topazes, and dozens of other types, each with a fixed function. What's interesting, and the show is quietly sophisticated about this, is that the system isn't presented as straightforwardly cruel, at least not from the inside. Most gems within it genuinely believe in it. They find their purpose meaningful. The problem isn't that every individual is suffering. The problem is that the system collapses the moment anyone steps outside it, and it treats the ones who can't or won't fit as defective rather than different. There's a specific homeworld concept called a defective gem, one that emerged wrong in some way, with unexpected powers or unusual features. The show has a few of these characters, and we'll talk about them properly when we get to the off-colors. The point for now is that Homeworld's response to imperfection isn't compassion or curiosity, it's erasure. Cross-gem fusion is also banned, and this is worth pausing on because it matters enormously to the show's themes. Fusion, the act of two gems combining into a single entity, is allowed between gems of the same type for combat purposes, but a fusion between two different types of gem, forbidden. The resulting entity is considered an abomination. The official Homeworld line is that it's monstrous, a violation of the natural order. What the show eventually makes clear is that this ban is really about control. A cross-gem fusion can't be neatly categorized. It has a new identity, new powers, new way of being in the world that doesn't fit anywhere in the caste system. And the caste system requires that everything fit. Homeworld also has a concept of eras, broad historical periods marked by significant shifts in technology or circumstance. Era 1 is the old expansion period, when Homeworld was colonizing planets at a high rate, and gems were being created in large numbers. Era 2 came after a specific catastrophic event, one we'll get to, when resources were depleted and new gems were manufactured with fewer innate abilities. Era 2 gems are generally less powerful than Era 1 gems, and they know it, And there's a whole complicated cultural weight around that difference. Peridot, who's an Era 2 gem, spends a lot of the show dealing with what that means for her sense of herself. She arrives on Earth with technological augmentations that compensate for the abilities she wasn't born with. And when she loses them, she has to figure out who she is without them. It's a good arc. The homeworld aesthetic, this cold, demanding perfectionism, casts a long shadow over every character who came from there. Pearl's rigidity, her need for order and approval, Jasper's complete inability to imagine any value in herself outside of battle. Even the diamonds, in their own ways, are trapped by it. They built a machine that chewed them up too. Compared to Beach City, which is warm and slightly chaotic and full of people who have complicated feelings about things, Homeworld couldn't feel more like another world. Which is the point, really. The show is interested in the gap between those two places and in a kid who grew up in one and somehow ended up being the hinge between them. But before we get to Beach City, we need to spend some time with the diamonds themselves. Because the diamonds are the show's most complicated achievement, and they deserve their own section. The show's music, composed by Ivy and Surashu, uses this distinction between worlds brilliantly. Homeworld's musical palette is cold, synthesized, electronically perfect. There are no rough edges in the sound. Beach City's themes are warm, guitar-based, slightly scruffy. The musical contrast does as much as the visual contrast to tell you what it feels like to be in each place. There's also something interesting about how the show portrays gems who believe in the caste system. The show doesn't make them stupid or obviously villainous in the early seasons. Jasper, who's a devoted Homeworld loyalist, right up until she isn't, is genuinely competent and genuinely believes in what she's doing. She has a personal relationship with the system. It produced her. It gave her purpose. She excelled within it. Her problem with the crystal gems isn't that she's blindly obedient to Yellow Diamond. It's that she genuinely thinks they're wrong, that Rose Quartz was a coward who disguised selfishness as ideology, and that the Earth is not worth what was lost over it. You can disagree with that position, and the show absolutely wants you to, while understanding that it's a position held by someone who has reasons for it. That's harder to write than a simple villain, and the show earns the difficulty. The Homeworld hierarchy also has one detail that never quite comes up directly but is implied throughout. Gems who serve the diamonds live in a kind of permanent performance. You are always your gem type, always your rank, always perfectly what you were made to be, in front of everyone, forever. There's no private self, there's no off-duty. The relief that characters like Peridot and Lapis seem to feel in the barn on Earth has something to do with, for possibly the first time in their lives, not being watched. There are 4 of them, and in order of descending size and presumably descending age, they go white, yellow, blue, and pink. I want to approach this as a family portrait, rather than a power ranking, because that's actually how the show treats them. The Diamond Authority is a political structure, yes, and a terrifying one, but it's also 4 people who have known each other for an incomprehensible amount of time and have done enormous damage to each other along the way. The political stuff is almost secondary to the family stuff, in the end. White Diamond is the one who's hardest to talk about, without giving too much away, so I'll tread a bit lightly here and come back to her properly later. What I can say is this. She's the oldest, the most powerful, the most isolated. She lives in a ship the size of a moon. Other gems, including the other diamonds, seem to find her genuinely terrifying rather than just powerful. There's a specific detail that comes up later. She has the ability to reach inside another gem and essentially override their personality, replacing who they are with a blank, compliant version. And the show frames this as something she genuinely believes is helping, perfecting. She's not performing cruelty. She has constructed an entire architecture of self-justification around the idea that control is care. It's a very specific kind of horror, that one. Yellow Diamond is the one who, if you had to describe in a single word, you'd probably go with efficient. She runs Homeworld's operations with a kind of ruthless competence that's almost admirable in the abstract. Her power is disruption. She can poof gems with a touch, destabilize their form just by pointing at them. In battles, she's genuinely devastating. Off the battlefield, she is burying something. The show reveals this slowly and then all at once, the way grief tends to work. Yellow Diamond lost Pink Diamond, the youngest of their group, the one they were all meant to be looking after. And her response was to work harder. Fill the calendar. Keep colonizing planets. Stay so busy that there's no time to sit with it. She's cold and dismissive and sometimes openly cruel. And underneath all of that, she is devastated, and she does not want anyone to see it. Estelle voices her, and I think about that casting decision a lot. There's a warmth in the voice even when the character is being terrible. You can hear something unresolved. Blue Diamond is the one who couldn't move on at all. Where yellow went cold, blue went soft, or rather, open. Her power is emotional contagion. She can project her own feelings outward and make everyone around her feel them involuntarily. When she's grieving, everyone near her grieves. It's not intentional exactly. She's just so full of feeling that it leaks. She spent thousands of years, literally thousands of years, mourning Pink Diamond. She kept a human zoo on the grounds that humans were Pink's favorite thing, and she wanted to preserve them. She wept at a palanquin that had belonged to Pink. She visited Earth covertly just to stand in the places where Pink had been. The show is careful not to make this sympathetic in a simple way. Blue Diamond also helped destroy thousands of gems and did enormous harm and never particularly questioned any of it. The grief is real. The consequences of her actions are also real. Both can be true simultaneously. That's the show's position on almost everyone in it. Pink Diamond is the youngest and the smallest, physically compact in a way that embarrassed her, given that diamonds are supposed to be these colossal figures of authority. She's also the one the whole story is about in the end, even though she's been gone for thousands of years before the main series starts. I want to hold off on telling Pink's full story here because it really does deserve its own section, and we'll get to it. What I want to note now, in the context of the family portrait, is just this. She was overlooked. Not cruelly, not consistently, but in that specific way that happens to the youngest sibling, or the one who's a bit too loud, or the one whose feelings inconvenience everyone else's plans. She wanted her own colony for years before she was given one. She wanted to be taken seriously. She wanted, I think, to be loved in a way that included being seen. And the other diamonds loved her in the way that powerful people sometimes love the people close to them, by deciding what was best for them without asking. The four of them together are a portrait of what happens to a family that never learned to say the difficult thing. Everything got buried, managed, routed around, and it caused thousands of years of catastrophe. No notes from me on the emotional dynamics there. Completely unfamiliar territory. Pink's compact size, by the way, is one of those details that the show leaves half explained. All diamonds are enormous. Their authority is expressed partly in scale, the way they can simply loom over everything they encounter. Pink is small by diamond standards, stocky, and this embarrassed her. In the official homeworld murals and historical records, she was depicted the same size as the others, because the diamonds, presenting as uniformly grand, was important to the image of the authority. There's a children's game that all four diamonds used to play together. They would sink into the water of Blue Diamond's pool, and one diamond would sing while submerged, and the others would try to guess the song from the vibrations. It's described in flashbacks and is one of those incredibly specific details that does a lot of work in a small space. The image of these four colossal beings playing a quiet guessing game in a pool, the relationship between them that existed before the weight of all the history, makes the tragedy of what they became much more affecting. Blue Diamond grieved the loss of Pink in a way that affected everyone in her court for millennia. She had this quality of sadness that was so total it became a feature of being around her. There's an episode where Stephen is briefly in her presence on Earth and is overcome with an emotion he can't source, a sadness that doesn't belong to him, leaking out of her without intention. Blue Diamond doesn't know she does this. Or maybe she knows, and it's the only way she can share what she's carrying. There's something in all 4 diamonds that the show uses to comment on how power and emotional suppression interact. White is the extreme example. Has eliminated the problem of feeling by eliminating feeling. But yellow and blue have their versions of it too. Yellow becomes productivity. Blue becomes grief made public. Pink ran away. None of them, before Stephen, had ever met anyone who just sat with them and asked how they were doing and meant it. The word kindergarten in German means literally children's garden. It's a place where young things grow. Rebecca Sugar chose it as the name for Homeworld's gem production facilities. And I think that's a deliberate piece of irony that the show lets sit quietly without commenting on it too much. Homeworld's kindergartens are carved into the sides of rock faces, usually on uninhabited or soon-to-be colonized planets. They are visually extraordinary. These vast cliff walls full of human-shaped holes, like someone took a giant cookie cutter to the rock and pressed thousands of bodies into it. The shapes are specific to the type of gem being created. The more you look at them, the stranger they get. The mechanism involves injectors, enormous drill-like machines that are driven into the rock face and then left. They inject a kind of organic material. The show keeps this deliberately vague into the spaces within the stone, and that material interacts with the minerals in the rock over what can be a very long time. Decades, sometimes longer. Eventually, a gem emerges. It cracks out of its mold, fully formed, knows its name and its purpose and its place in the hierarchy. No childhood, no development, just present. The detail that always got to me is that the quality of the gem produced depends on the quality of the rock. A kindergarten in a mineral-rich area will produce standard, functional gems. A kindergarten set up hastily in depleted or compromised ground will produce gems with irregularities, unexpected traits, unusual powers, forms that don't match expectations. The show calls these defective, though that word is one of those that the show puts in the mouths of characters we're meant to examine carefully. Amethyst is a kindergarten gem. She was created on Earth in the prime kindergarten in what is now the desert in the American Southwest. The cliffs there are real looking in the way the show renders them, dusty pink and ochre and full of those empty shapes where gems used to be. Amethyst has a complicated relationship with the place. She knows that she came from it, that it's the closest thing she has to a birthplace, and she knows that every gem who came from it drained something from the earth to do so. There's a moment early in the show where she calls herself and all the kindergarten gems parasites, and Stephen is horrified by it. And she says it with this flattened affect that suggests she's been saying it to herself for a long time. The show doesn't let that framing stand as true, but it also takes seriously the pain behind it. One of the things the show explores through the kindergarten system is the environmental cost of colonization. Making gems requires life, organic material, planetary resources, the literal nutrients of a living world. A planet that's been fully colonized will have had that life extracted from it. Earth's kindergartens were shut down before colonization was complete, which is why the planet's still here, still teeming with life, still the kind of place you'd want to live. The show draws this out slowly and patiently over the first 2 seasons, mostly through Peridot, who arrives on Earth with a purely instrumental view of it and has to learn, uncomfortably, that the planet and its inhabitants are worth more than the materials they represent. There's also the Beta Kindergarten, which is separate from the Prime one. The Beta was set up later in the war as a kind of emergency measure. More gems, faster, even though the resources weren't really there to support it. The gems that came from the Beta Kindergarten are rougher, less consistent, more prone to unexpected traits. Jasper came from the Beta Kindergarten, and she carries a specific pride about that. She considers herself exceptional despite the conditions a standard produced on depleted ground. It's a kind of defiance that turns inward, which is very Jasper. The Junji Ito influence on the kindergarten design is something the production team mentioned in interviews, and you can feel it. The body-shaped holes in the rock face have a horror-adjacent quality if you really look at them. Not frightening, exactly, but uncanny, like looking at something that should be alive and finding it empty. And here's a fun detail I've always found quietly affecting. The show sometimes cuts to the kindergarten and shows those empty spaces, thousands of them, in the dark. And you think about the fact that each one of those shapes is someone, was someone, or could have been. The holes are the history. The experience of emerging from a kindergarten is one the show never dramatizes directly. We never see a new gem being born. But what we understand is that it involves full immediate consciousness. You crack out of stone and you know who you are and you know what you're for. No adjustment period, no gradual learning of language or navigation of who you are. Just present, complete, purposed. I find myself wondering what that first moment is like. Whether there's anything like joy in it, or whether joy is something that develops after. The show suggests, through Amethyst, that the emergence can be emotionally significant. She describes hers as her first real memory, and there's weight to it that suggests it's not nothing. What she doesn't have is anyone who knew her before. The other gems who came from the prime kindergarten emerged thousands of years before her, and were either bubbled, corrupted, or long gone. She came out alone in a quiet canyon and found a world that had moved entirely on from the reason she existed. The crystal gems were living a few miles away on a cliff above the beach, but they hadn't found her yet. There's an episode where Steven and Amethyst go back to the prime kindergarten together, and she shows him where she came from. Her specific hole in the rock, her shape preserved in the stone. And she uses that trip to confront something she's been avoiding, which is that she feels like an accident. Like she was made for a purpose that got canceled before she arrived and nobody bothered to tell her. Steven's response is essentially that he doesn't care why she exists, he's just glad she does. Which is the right thing to say and also the thing that's hardest to actually believe when you're the one asking the question. Pearl is the crystal gem. I suspect most people underestimate when they first meet her, because she's introduced in a way that invites you to find her slightly uptight. She's precise. She's worried. She corrects people. She keeps very detailed holograms of her battle formations and would very much like everyone to look at them. What the show reveals, slowly and then with increasing weight, is that Pearl is carrying more history than anyone else in the main cast. More than Garnet, who has her own extensive history. More, arguably, than the people whose history it is. She was the only one who knew the truth about Rose Quartz. And she kept that secret for thousands of years. And it shaped everything she became. But let's start earlier than that. Pearls, as a type, are created to serve. They're the companion class of gem society, decorative, capable, trained in whatever their owner requires, and entirely without status of their own. A pearl exists in relation to whoever she belongs to. That's not a description of what pearls do in Homeworld's framework. It's a description of what they are. This is worth sitting with, because it makes Pearl's arc one of the most quietly radical things in the show. She starts as Pink Diamond's Pearl, and the two of them had a relationship that was genuinely close, secret, conspiratorial. Pink wasn't supposed to waste her Pearl's time on games and amusements, but that's mostly what they did. Running away from the court, finding small freedoms, Pearl was the only one who knew everything about Pink, every plan, every identity, every secret. When Pink became Rose Quartz and started the rebellion, Pearl became the first crystal gem alongside her. She fought, she trained others, she became, over the centuries of war, one of the most skilled combatants on either side of the conflict. Her weapon is a spear, and her fighting style is a thing of real precision. It looks like someone who spent a very long time learning something because it mattered to them, not because they were built for it. And she was the keeper of the secret. Only Pearl knew that Rose Quartz was Pink Diamond. When Pink staged her own death, it was Pearl's hands that made it happen. Pearl, transformed briefly into Rose's likeness, running Pink through with a sword in front of witnesses to sell the illusion. Pearl has carried that image for 6,000 years. There's a specific thing that Pearl does when the subject of Rose comes up in the early seasons. She deflects, redirects, suggests that Steven isn't ready, or that it's complicated, or that they should focus on the mission. At the time, it reads like protective secrecy. In retrospect, it reads like someone who has a very specific reason they cannot let the full truth come out and is managing that constant pressure with enormous effort. Her love for Rose is also something the show handles with a lot of care. It was real, and it was complicated, and it was not uncritically good for Pearl. She devoted herself to Rose in a way that, even after thousands of years of doing her own thing, kept her from fully being her own person. The show doesn't frame this as pathetic. It frames it as sad and very human in the way that loving someone much bigger than you can sometimes shrink you without either of you meaning it to. Her relationship with Steven is where she does some of her best growing. He's Rose's son, which makes him simultaneously the reminder of everything she lost and the evidence that Rose chose something she didn't choose Pearl for. And he's also just himself, a kid who needs her, who cares about her, who asks her things and means it. She has to learn to separate those things, and the show gives her time to do it. One detail I find genuinely moving. Pearl can store objects inside her gem. The show uses this mostly for laughs. She produces things impractically at great comic speed. But she kept Rose's sword in there for thousands of years, carried it with her, inside herself, everywhere she went. Probably didn't think about that very much. Maybe couldn't afford to. Pearl is also the crystal gem's historian. She keeps records, holographic ones stored in her gem, available for projection whenever needed. She knows the positions of every warp pad on Earth. She has detailed battle plans that she updates regularly, even though the battles those plans were designed for ended 5,000 years ago. She is, in her way, still living in the war, still maintaining it, keeping it ready. Her obsessive competence is a form of devotion that outlasted the person it was devoted to, and the show is clear-eyed about how that looks from the outside. It looks like someone who never quite stopped, who couldn't quite let go of the shape of the purpose, even after the specific content of it was gone. And Pearl dances. This is something the show establishes early and returns to throughout. Her grace and movement is part of who she is. The show was heavily influenced by magical girl anime, and Pearl has that quality of someone for whom being in motion is a way of being most fully herself. The crystal gems fusing, when it happens, almost always involves a dance of some kind. Pearl's version of fusion is often framed as an art form, something she approaches with the same care she brings to everything. She and Rose fused into rainbow quartz, a fleeting thing, shown in a flashback, during a complicated moment involving Greg's early attempts to understand Rose. It's a beautiful fusion, briefly glimpsed, and what it communicates is that Pearl and Rose were deeply intertwined in a way that excluded Greg without anyone intending it to. The complexity of that, how love can coexist with something that functions like possession, is the show at its most emotionally sophisticated. Garnet is the leader of the crystal gems for most of the series. And if you watch the show without knowing what she is, you read her as steady, solid, infallible in a way the others aren't. She has this quality of certainty about her. She'll give Steven a single nod of encouragement when the other two are panicking, and somehow that's enough. What the show eventually reveals, and the episode that does it, Jailbreak, is a genuinely electrifying piece of television even by normal standards, is that Garnet is a fusion. She's two gems who are permanently fused together, who have chosen to stay that way, not out of strategy or necessity, but because they love each other, and the fused form is their way of being together. She is, in a sense, a living relationship. The two gems are Ruby and Sapphire, and their story is one of the most quietly beautiful things in the show. Sapphires are rare. They serve in diamond courts as seers. They have future vision, the ability to see possible outcomes with some degree of accuracy. They're treated as precious, both because the ability is genuinely useful and because scarcity makes things valuable in Homeworld's system. Blue Diamond had a small group of them in her court, and one of them was the Sapphire we'll come to know as half of Garnet. Rubies are the opposite, common. Mass-produced soldier gems, usually deployed in groups of 5, each one not terribly different from the others in Homeworld's eyes. The same basic form, the same hot-tempered energy, the same role. One ruby is more or less interchangeable with another ruby from Homeworld's perspective, and the show treats this as a horror that it doesn't need to explain too loudly. They met on the day Homeworld came to Pink Diamond's court with bad news. Sapphire was there to deliver a prophecy to Blue Diamond. She'd seen that a rebellion was forming, that it would disrupt things. Ruby was one of 5 assigned to protect her. And what happened next was an accident. The emerging crystal gems attacked. In the chaos, a rebel lunged for Sapphire, and Ruby, acting purely on instinct, throwing herself into the way, made contact. 2 different gems touching in that specific synchronized way caused something that wasn't supposed to be possible. They fused. Garnet burst into existence, confused and enormous, and for a moment, everything stopped. Because cross-gem fusion had never happened like that before. Not accidentally, not in front of Blue Diamond's court. It was an abomination by Homeworld's rules, and Blue Diamond was furious, and both of them were going to be severely punished. Sapphire grabbed Ruby and they ran, fled off the edge of a floating island, landed on Earth, and had, for the first time, the chance to talk to each other properly. The episode that tells this story, The Answer, is animated in a storybook style, watercolor looking, and deliberately dreamlike, because it's being told as a bedtime story that Garnet tells Steven when he asks how she got together. And there's something perfect about that framing. The most foundational story of the crystal gems, the reason their team even exists, told as a children's story, told gently. They chose to stay fused. That's the key detail. Not because they had to, not because it was tactically sound, but because being together as Garnet felt like the truest version of what they were. Ruby's heat and impulsiveness balanced by Sapphire's cool and foresight. Sapphire's tendency to accept what she's seen as inevitable, given energy and resistance by Ruby's refusal to just go along with it. The fusion is better and more interesting than either of them separately, and they know it. When they find Rose and tell her what happened, Rose is delighted. This weird, impossible, tender thing that violated all the rules of the society she was trying to fight. It confirmed everything she believed about what gems could be. Garnet's future vision, the ability that comes from having a sapphire in the mix, works differently from a pure sapphire's. She doesn't see one clear future. She sees branches, probabilities, a web of outcomes that she has to navigate. She makes decisions by finding the path that leads somewhere worth going. There's a meditation there about the relationship between certainty and hope that the show handles without ever stating it directly, which is exactly the right way to handle it. And there's this. When Garnet speaks in the show, she's almost always speaking for both of them. When she says, "I believe in you," there are 2 voices that mean it. Ruby and Sapphire's individual personalities are still visible inside Garnet, and the show reveals this in the episodes where they separate. Ruby is hot-tempered, intensely emotional, deeply loyal, and physically impulsive. She moves before she thinks. Sapphire is cooler, more patient, accustomed to living in her foreknowledge in a way that sometimes shades into fatalism. She can see what's coming and occasionally has to be reminded that seeing it isn't the same as it being inevitable. Garnet's steadiness comes from the combination. Ruby's emotional intensity is channeled through Sapphire's composure. Sapphire's tendency toward predetermined acceptance is pushed back on by Ruby's refusal to simply accept anything. Together, they produce something that is neither of those things alone. A person who is both feeling and considered, who can be still without being withdrawn. When they're separated, they're both diminished. Not because either of them is incomplete, they each have their own wholeness, but because the specific thing they create together stops existing, and they both feel the absence of it. There's an arc in a later season where Ruby leaves for a while, and both she and Sapphire are visibly not quite right without each other. Not destroyed, just quieter. Garnet rarely unfuses by choice. It's treated as genuinely significant when it happens. The show marks it, doesn't let it pass casually. There's an episode where Garnet unfuses and remains unfused for the duration of an argument, and the separation is played with a quality of exposure, like watching someone take their armor off. The trust between Ruby and Sapphire is what makes Garnet possible, and when that trust is damaged, the distance between them is physical. The show introduced Ruby and Sapphire's relationship years before it was allowed to explicitly call it a relationship, using the language of fusion as a workaround that became, in time, something much more fully expressed. There's an episode, The Question, where Ruby proposes to Sapphire. They get married and reunited, and the ceremony is interrupted by a homeworld attack, and they get married again in the middle of the fight. It's the most Steven Universe thing imaginable. Pink Diamond wanted a colony for a very long time before she got one. This is one of those details the show reveals gradually, and it recontextualizes a lot of things once you have it. The image of Pink Diamond in the early seasons, before the full truth comes out, is of an imperious, distant figure, a diamond like the others. The gems that served her speak of her death with reverence. The crystal gems have complicated feelings about her for reasons they don't fully explain. She feels like history. Then you learn that she was asking for a colony, the thing that would mark her as a real diamond, a contributor to the Great Expansion, and being told no. Told she was too young, too immature, not ready. Yellow wouldn't give her a proper answer. Blue was sympathetic but ultimately deferred to the others. White, presumably, didn't engage with the question at all. She spent some of this waiting period with a gem called Spinel, who had been created specifically to be her companion, her best friend designed and built to keep her company, while the other diamonds were busy with their actual work. We'll come back to Spinel properly later, because her story is its own thing entirely and it deserves the space. What matters here is that Pink in this period was genuinely a child in some meaningful sense of the word. Enthusiastic, easily delighted, prone to dramatic emotional swings, not particularly equipped for the weight of what she was eventually given. Earth? When the diamonds finally gave Pink her colony, they gave her Earth, and she went, and what she found there undid her entirely. Life, everywhere. Organic, complicated, chaotic, mortal life. Animals, plants, humans, ecosystems. Things that lived and changed and died and changed again. Nothing like anything on Homeworld, where everything was designed and permanent and purposeful. Pink was astonished by it. Not in a scientific way. She wasn't cataloging it. She was just delighted. She wandered the surface of the planet in a form she'd created, a rose quartz, one of the gems being produced in the kindergartens, blending in with her own subjects to walk among the things she'd found. She watched humans. She found them fascinating in a way she couldn't entirely explain to the other diamonds because the other diamonds didn't find organic life particularly interesting. It was a resource. That was all. She went back to them and said, "I don't want to colonize this one. There's too much here. Can we find another planet?" They said no. She went back to Earth and kept trying to find ways to argue her case. She started a rebellion. Not a real one. Not at first. She was hoping that if things looked difficult enough, Homeworld would decide Earth wasn't worth the effort. She'd found a pearl to confide in. The one who would become the Crystal Gem's pearl. And they hatched this plan together. Rose Quartz would rally the Earth Gems, make it look like a proper uprising, and eventually the diamonds would cut their losses. It didn't work out that way. The rebellion turned real. Other gems found out what Rose was advocating for. The idea that a planet's life had value, that gems deserved to choose their own existence, and they believed it. They joined. What had been a strategic inconvenience became an actual war. And Pink, now deeply in it, had to figure out who she was. She'd been playing at being Rose Quartz for so long that the line between the identity and the person underneath it had blurred considerably. The gems fighting for her didn't know there was a line at all. Only Pearl knew. There's something genuinely melancholy about this stretch of the history when you understand it fully. She got what she wanted. Earth and immediately used it to become someone else entirely. The colony she'd asked for became the world she was trying to protect, and somewhere in that transformation she lost the ability to just be Pink Diamond. Or maybe she never really wanted to be Pink Diamond. Maybe that was the whole point. Pink had a moon base built on Earth's moon as part of the standard colonization setup. It's one of those details that grounds a show's history in something concrete. There's an episode where Steven visits it, and it's dusty and abandoned and still has Pink's holographic records intact, her observations about the colony. The moon base mural is where the show first shows Pink Diamond directly, in silhouette, tall and regal and nothing like what she actually was. The official version versus the real one. The real one was someone who spent a lot of time on the surface of a planet she was supposed to be colonizing, watching the life that lived there. There's a sense in the fragments the show gives you of Pink moving through early Earth with a kind of wide-eyed quality. She wasn't cataloging. She was experiencing. Sitting with humans for long enough to start to understand that these were people, in whatever the right sense of that word was. That they had inner lives, that they loved things, that they were going to die and they knew it and they kept going anyway. That understanding, gradual and complete, is what made her unwilling to go through with the colonization. You can't drain a planet of everything it has if you've come to believe that everything it has is worth the name of something. The Diamonds never quite got that far with Earth or with any of the other planets they colonized. It took someone who was already predisposed to finding things delightful to spend enough time among the living to understand them. Her relationship with Pearl deepened in this period. They were sharing something no one else knew. This double life, the secret exploration, the growing conviction that the original plan was wrong. They spent more time together as Pearl and Pink pretending to be Rose than they ever had in the official court dynamic. And that intimacy shaped everything that came after. The Gem War on Earth lasted for a very long time, and the show is appropriately vague about the exact timeline, because a vague long time is more affecting than a precise number of years when you're trying to convey something that enormous. What we know is that it ran for centuries, at minimum. The Crystal Gems, Rose's army were outnumbered and outgunned by Homeworld's forces. But they had something Homeworld's side didn't. They were fighting for the planet they were standing on. And that tends to matter. Rose, as a military leader, was not the strategist Pearl was. She was the symbol. She inspired because she believed things with her whole chest. Believed that gems deserved better. Believed that the Earth was worth dying for. Believed that the gems fighting alongside her were worth more than the roles they'd been given. She was not always right about things, and the show is gradually honest about that, but she was very good at making people feel like they could be more than they were built to be. Bismuth is the character who complicates the rebellion most interestingly. She was a crystal gem, a builder, who created the weapons the team used. Enormous, warm, passionate, and deeply strategic in a way that went further than anyone else was comfortable with. Her idea was the breaking point, a weapon specifically designed to shatter gems, not poof them, not contain them, shatter them permanently, destroy the gem, no regeneration, no recovery, gone. Rose refused, absolutely and finally. The crystal gems didn't kill. They poofed, they contained, but they didn't shatter. Bismuth thought this was wrong. She thought that fighting a war while refusing to eliminate your enemies was a kind of self-delusion, and she argued that hard. And when Rose wouldn't change her mind, something happened between them that the show doesn't show directly. Only the aftermath, which is Rose having bubbled Bismuth and never told the other crystal gems what happened to her. Bismuth spent thousands of years in a bubble inside Lion's Mane, alone, with no one knowing why or where she'd gone. The show handles this carefully. Both positions have something to them. Bismuth isn't wrong that war has consequences that idealism alone doesn't resolve. Rose isn't wrong that becoming the thing you're fighting against is its own kind of defeat. And the fact that Rose's solution was to bubble her friend and lie about it, that's the show showing you that Rose Quartz was not a simple hero. She made choices that were expedient and quietly cruel, and called them by better names. Eventually, the diamonds decided Earth wasn't worth the full effort anymore. The war had dragged on too long. The colony was behind schedule. Pink Diamond was still missing, officially shattered by Rose Quartz, and the other diamonds were grieving and furious and ready to be done. The way they ended it was the corrupting light. 3 diamonds, white, yellow, and blue, combined their power and directed it at Earth in a single catastrophic blast. A wave of light that rolled across the planet and changed every gem it touched. Not destroyed them, changed them. Their forms warped, their minds broke. Whatever made them coherent, whatever held their sense of self together, the light tore that apart and left something else in its place. A creature driven by instinct, formless, dangerous, unable to remember what it had been. The show describes it as a sound sometimes, a frequency that the gem mind can't survive intact. It's understood as grief weaponized, the combined mourning of 3 diamonds expressed as destruction because they had no other language for it. Rose, Pearl, and Garnet survived because Rose threw up her shield at the last moment, and the 3 of them were within it. She couldn't save anyone else. All across the planet, gems who had been people became monsters, and there was nothing to be done except, one by one, bubble them. Rose spent the rest of her life trying to figure out how to heal them. It's one of the reasons she couldn't quite move on. All those bubbles in the temple, all those gems she'd fought alongside, waiting in the dark. She'd promised herself she would fix it. That promise, too, got handed to Stephen. Bismuth is one of those characters who gets introduced late in the series and then immediately feels like she should have been there from the beginning. She's physically massive, built from a layered, iridescent, black and rainbow stone. And she has this specific quality of person who has thought hard about the right thing and arrived at a position and doesn't appreciate being asked to doubt it. Her warmth toward her old friends when she meets them again is enormous and genuine. Her disappointment at what she sees as Rose's failing is equally enormous and genuine. Both can be true at once, and the show lets them be. The crystal gems who followed Rose were often gems who didn't fit neatly into Homeworld's system. Not just defective ones, but ones who had encountered some version of the question that the rebellion put into words. The system said they had a function. Rose said they had a self. That's a significant message to receive. The war didn't just offer Earth's continued existence as a prize. It offered the idea that there was something worth calling you beyond what you were made to be. The soldiers who were corrupted at the end of the war, the ones Rose couldn't save, were often those who had believed that idea most fully. They'd given everything to the fight. The corrupting light erased the part of them that had made that choice, and all that was left was instinct and distress. The gem the show calls Nephrite was one of Rose's soldiers. She was corrupted and became a monstrous creature. When Stephen later encounters her partially healed mind in a dream, and she recognizes him, recognizes the shield, says Rose in a voice full of something, it's one of the show's heaviest moments, contained in a few seconds of communication between 2 people separated by a catastrophe that one of them caused. So the war ended and the crystal gems won, in the sense that Homeworld left and the colonization stopped and the planet was still here. But winning in this context meant 3 survivors standing in a silent landscape with thousands of bubbled gems and a ruined kindergarten, and a planet that had no idea what had just happened on its surface. It was not a triumphant ending. It was more like the moment when the noise stops and you finally understand how much everything hurts. Garnet has talked about this period in the fragments the show reveals, and what comes through is the strangeness of rebuilding something from almost nothing. 3 gems who had each, in different ways, chosen this life, now living it without the person who had made it cohere. Because Rose was there, Pink Diamond, technically, still alive, now permanently in her Rose Quartz form, but the war was over and the shape of what they were doing had to change. They settled at the Crystal Temple, an ancient structure on the cliffside above what would eventually become Beach City. They kept their promise, containing corrupted gems protecting the Earth, continuing to exist in a world that was now entirely their own responsibility. Hundreds of years in, They found Amethyst. She'd been developing in the prime kindergarten underground the whole time, blissfully unaware that the war had ended, that the colony was abandoned, that no one was coming to collect her. When she finally emerged, small and loud and purple and completely unbothered by her circumstances, the crystal gems found her and decided she was theirs now. Amethyst had no history with Homeworld, no grief about the war, no complicated relationship with Rose's identity or the weight of what everything meant. She was just a gem who'd come out of a rock and found a family already waiting for her, and she took that arrangement entirely at face value. There's something genuinely lovely about that. Lion is another piece of this in-between period that the show parcels out carefully. Rose had a lion, a regular one, it seems, who she raised and cared for and who, through some mechanism the show never entirely explains, became something other than a regular lion after he died. Pink, magical, with a mane that contains a pocket dimension full of the things Rose wanted to preserve. Her sword, her armor, the tape she made for Steven. The show treats Lion's exact nature as one of those mysteries that doesn't need to be solved, and I think that's the right call. There's a beach and a temple and 3 gems and a lion and a growing city of humans who don't entirely understand what's on the cliffs above them. Centuries pass, the world changes around them, they stay. And then, maybe 20 or 30 years before the main series begins, a touring musician named Greg Universe drove his van into Beach City. Greg is important, and I want to give him his own section, which is coming up. What matters here is just the note that the crystal gem's long, quiet post-war existence had a shape to it that Greg's arrival changed. Not immediately, gradually, over years, in the way that love tends to work. The show does give us occasional glimpses of the crystal gems in this long in-between period and their fond ones. There's an episode where Steven discovers a journal written by a human explorer named Buddy Budwick, who encountered the crystal gems hundreds of years ago when he was mapping the world. Pearl drew him a map of the dangerous places he shouldn't visit, which are all the most interesting places, obviously, and he visited all of them anyway. What the journal captures is the crystal gems as they were in their long middle period. Watchful, capable, occasionally interacting with humans but mostly existing parallel to them. Garnet is briefly shown at this time as exactly what she always is, certain, brief, reassuring in her certainty. Pearl has her map. There's a painting somewhere, centuries old, of Garnet punching a shark away from a sailor's boat, which is the most Garnet painting that could possibly exist. The gem monsters they fought across all those years were, we understand later, their old allies. Every corrupted gem they contained was someone they'd fought beside. That particular weight, the knowledge that the thing you're protecting the Earth from used to be someone who loved the Earth, never quite comes up directly in the show. But it's there underneath everything the crystal gems do in the early seasons. Rose asked them to contain those gems and figure out how to heal them, and 5,000 years later, they're still doing it. The Steven Universe franchise treats this long period with a kind of gentleness, these 3 women and a lion keeping the world safe, waiting without knowing they were waiting for anything. The world changing around them while they stayed constant. The occasional encounter with a human who saw something strange on a beach at night and couldn't explain it. The quiet accumulation of time. Greg Universe is one of those characters you could easily underestimate because the show lets you. He lives in a van. He runs a car wash. His musical career peaked early and he seems genuinely unbothered by this. He's often eating something. He wears a sleeveless shirt. He's also, when you look at him properly, one of the show's most emotionally developed characters. A person who was genuinely transformed by loving someone, who held on to that transformation even after she was gone, and who raised a half-alien son with more grace than almost anyone would manage in that circumstance. He arrived in Beach City as a young musician with ambitions and a van and an entirely unfounded confidence in his own destiny. And he met Rose Quartz on a cliff above the ocean. And that was that. For him, anyway. Rose took a while. Not because she was indifferent, she was fascinated by Greg in the way she was fascinated by all humans, which was entirely and without reserve. But Pearl was there, and Pearl had complicated feelings about Greg, and Rose was navigating the dynamics of her existing relationships alongside the new one. The show covers this period in the episode We Need to Talk, which involves a lot of fraught dancing and a conversation about what fusion means, and ends with Greg asking Rose to just talk to him like a person rather than a curiosity, which is the thing she'd been avoiding. She did. And they kept talking for years, and it became the most important relationship in both their lives. Greg has said that Rose told him about her history, some of it, at least, about the rebellion, about her feelings for the planet. He seems to have understood, in the way that perceptive people sometimes understand things that can't be fully explained, that she was caring more than she showed. He didn't need to know everything. He loved who she was in the moments he could see her, and he trusted her with his heart without requiring the full accounting. The decision about Stephen came from Rose. The show makes this clear. She wanted to have a child, and she knew what it meant. To create a new life, a half-gem, half-human person unlike anything that had ever existed, she would give up her physical form permanently. The gem would pass to the child, she would become part of him rather than existing alongside him. What she left behind for Stephen was a video recording made before he was born, in which she tries to explain herself. It's a short video. It's very Rose, warm and elliptical, and not entirely honest. She tells him that she gave up her form to become him, that he's not her replacement but a new person entirely, and that she loves him in a way she can't fully articulate, which is the most honest thing in it. Greg kept that recording. Kept the sword Pearl gave him, kept loving her in the soft, undemonstrative way he'd always loved her, which was by raising their son carefully and staying available, and never once suggesting that the unusual circumstances of his family were a burden. He also kept her laser light cannon in his storage unit for years, never quite ready to let it go. That feels very right for Greg. Someone who holds onto the things that mattered without necessarily being able to explain why. Greg's musical career is given some light backstory across the series. He had a manager named Marty, who appears in the show as a spectacular illustration of someone who was entirely wrong about everything, but completely confident. Marty had brought Greg on tour, and Greg had split off from that to do his own thing. He drove to Beach City essentially by accident, or by whatever the right word is for choices that feel inevitable in retrospect. The song he played when he first met Rose, What Can I Do For You?, is one of the songs that survived into the show's universe as something Greg still performs. There's something nice about the detail that the song he wrote trying to impress a gem alien is the same song he plays at his car wash years later. The arc of ambition collapsing into something quieter and actually better. Pearl's jealousy of Greg is handled with genuine complexity. She wasn't wrong that Rose and Greg's relationship changed things. She had known Rose for thousands of years, fought beside her, kept her secrets, been the only other person who understood the full weight of who Rose really was. Greg had known Rose for a few years and understood her in a completely different way, in the way that someone who sees you without all the history sometimes can. Pearl couldn't offer Rose what Greg offered her, the perspective of someone who wasn't also carrying the war. The relationship between Pearl and Greg improves over the course of the show, slowly and not without bumps, into something that functions as real co-parenting. They both loved Rose and they both loved Stephen, and they eventually learned to let those things sit beside each other without competing. It takes most of 5 seasons. It's worth it. Stephen Court's universe was born in Beach City and spent the first several years of his life mostly with his dad. And then at some point, that transition happened where he moved into the Crystal Temple, and the shape of his life became what the show depicts from the very beginning. He starts the series around 12 years old, actually slightly younger in the first season, though the show plays fast and loose with this. And the thing that kicks everything off is that he finally, for the first time, manages to summon his weapon, which turns out to be his mother's shield, which is notable because the shield was a diamond-level weapon, and no one at the time understands that. Stephen's powers are different from most gems in that they're tied to his emotional state. He can't fully control them with technique the way Pearl controls her spear. They respond to how he's feeling. When he's relaxed and happy, things work. When he's scared or overwhelmed, they don't. Or they do something unexpected. This makes his early years of training genuinely chaotic, and the show plays this largely for warmth rather than frustration. He heals things, not just gems, but people. He can cry magical tears that have healing properties, which he discovers fairly early when he heals Connie's eyesight by accident while they are watching a film. He can project a shield. He can float, gently, involuntarily, usually when he's feeling particularly light. He can grow plants, communicate with them in a vague sort of way. He can enter dreams and share them. He can project his consciousness into other people, which creates some of the show's more unsettling scenarios. The Crystal Temple is where he lives, and it's worth describing. It's built into a cliff face on the edge of the ocean, and it has a door where it connects to the beach. Behind that door is a star-shaped warp pad, and beyond the warp pad are the individual rooms that open from each crystal gem's gemstone in the door. Pearl's room is clean, sparse, and full of holograms. Amethyst's room is a hoarded chaos of things she's collected over the centuries. Garnet's room is a cube with a lava floor and a central platform, and a quiet that suggests it's a place for thinking rather than doing. The room where the corrupted gems are bubbled is a vast burning space full of floating spheres, and Steven goes in there sometimes and sits with them and doesn't say anything. His relationship with each crystal gem is different, and the show uses those differences to do a lot of quiet character work. Amethyst is the sibling. They have the same sense of humor, the same tolerance for chaos, the same willingness to eat something inadvisable and see what happens. She's the one who is most comfortable, just existing with him. No instruction necessary. Pearl is the worried one, the careful one, the one who keeps reaching for teachable moments and occasionally has to be reminded that Steven is a person, not a project. She loves him fiercely. She also, early on, sometimes looks at him and sees Rose and has to look again. Garnet is the steady one. She tells him things are going to be okay in a way that lands differently from when other people say it, because Garnet has future vision and she's saying it as someone who has checked. She's also, when the situation calls for it, a full wall of warmth that she deploys, suddenly and completely. The show has this recurring thing where Garnet will pull Steven into a hug and he'll just sort of disappear into it, which I find disproportionately comforting. Beach City is the other world he belongs to, and it's every bit as important as the gem world. The Mahaswarans live down the road. Lars and Sadie work at the Big Donut. Ronaldo Fryman runs a paranormal investigation blog, and is mostly wrong about everything, but not entirely. Mayor Dewey is Mayor Dewey. The town is full of people who know about the crystal gems in the vague way that people in a small town know about the unusual thing nearby, accepting it as local color without necessarily engaging with the specifics. Steven is the bridge between all of these things. He's the kid who goes on missions to bubble corrupted gems and also goes to the arcade with Connie. Both halves of his life are real and both matter. That's one of the show's most consistent arguments. Beach City has a specific, slightly faded seaside resort town quality to it. The Funland amusement park is there, perpetually understaffed. The Big Donut is where Lars and Sadie work, and a significant portion of early Steven's social life happens at the counter of that donut shop, which is a very true detail. The community theater hosts performances. Fish Stew Pizza is the fryman's place. The Beach City Walk Fries serves fry bits, which are just the end pieces of the fries, and which Amethyst orders in enormous quantities. These are silly details, and the show is earnest about their importance. The town is a community, and communities are made of people who work at donut shops and run pizza places and have complicated feelings about their jobs, and those feelings matter. Steven knows everyone in town by name. Everyone in town knows Steven, or knows of him, or knows something strange lives on the cliff. The relationship between the human town and the gem world is one of the show's most carefully maintained through lines. Steven's early missions establish the tone of the first season quite well. They go somewhere via warp pad, encounter a corrupted gem, manage it somehow, often messily, often because Steven does something unexpected, and come home. The corrupted gems in the early episodes are rendered as monster of the week antagonists, but the show is already seeding the knowledge that they are not really monsters. They're damaged people. Steven's instinct to try to communicate with them rather than just fight them is an early expression of everything the show eventually builds him up to be. The Cookie Cat incident, which is the first episode's plot, involves Steven trying to summon his weapon by eating an ice cream bar, because a commercial said the Cookie Cat was here to fight for the galaxy. It doesn't work. What works at the end of the episode is him feeling something genuine about the situation. His power responds to his emotional state from the very beginning, and the show establishes this gently, letting it sit as a detail before building it into the show's whole argument. Connie is introduced in the first season as a girl Steven keeps seeing around town, who seems nervous and not quite belonging in the sun-drenched beach environment, and she turns into one of the most important people in the show within about 3 episodes of them properly meeting. She's clever, bookish, earnest in a slightly awkward way, and she sees the world the crystal gems inhabit with a combination of wonder and careful practicality that is genuinely different from how Steven sees it. She reads a lot of fantasy novels. This is one of my favorite Connie details, because the show lets it be both a slightly whimsical character trait and something that actually matters. She came to the crystal gems already culturally prepared in a way for the idea that the world is larger and stranger than it appears, and that regular people sometimes get swept into it. She just didn't expect it to happen at quite this particular beach. Pearl trains her in swordsmanship, and this is a detail that has more thought behind it than it initially seems. Pearl designs her technique specifically to work in tandem with Steven's shield, the idea being that Steven's defensive capabilities and Connie's offensive ones make them a unit. Pearl teaches Connie to fight as Steven's sword and Steven to be Connie's shield, which is a lovely articulation of what it means to be someone's partner in a broad sense. Stevenie is the fusion they form, the first human gem fusion, and it's one of the show's more quietly extraordinary things. It happens for the first time at a party, which is the right venue for something that feels so much like adolescence. They're dancing and it's going well, and then there's this moment of perfect sync, and Stevenie exists, a single person made of 2 teenagers, walking through a crowd, experiencing the very specific vertigo of being new and suddenly visible in a way that neither Steven nor Connie was individually. The show uses Stevenie across the series to explore things that are difficult to approach directly. Dysphoria, being perceived, the strangeness of inhabiting a body that doesn't quite match your sense of yourself. Stevenie is read by everyone who sees them as beautiful and strange and not quite placeable, and Stevenie isn't sure how to sit with that. It's one of those areas where the show is working on a frequency that a younger viewer will feel without necessarily understanding, and an older viewer will understand with a slight catch in the throat. Connie's relationship with her parents, especially her mother Priyanka, gets its own careful treatment. Priyanka starts out as an antagonist in a small way, strict, controlling, someone who monitors Connie's activities carefully and isn't sure what to make of Steven's influence. And then there's an episode where Connie is in danger, and her mother has to make a fast decision, and you see her clearly as someone who is trying, imperfectly, to keep her daughter safe in a world she doesn't fully understand, and the antagonism falls away. By Steven Universe Future, Dr. Maheswaran is the person who sits across from Steven and asks him, with genuine clinical care, whether he's okay, and is the first person in the whole narrative to actually say the words post-traumatic stress and mean them. It's the right trajectory for the character. Connie matters to the story not just as Steven's partner, but as the show's argument that the human world isn't less important or less real than the gem world. She doesn't have powers, she can't fuse alone, she can't fight off a corrupted gem without support. And she saves the day on multiple occasions anyway, because she's paying attention and she cares and she knows what she's doing. The sword fighting training is taken seriously in the show in a way that feels earned. Pearl teaches Connie for real, with proper technique. and Connie trains hard, and there are episodes where you watch her be genuinely skilled in a way that isn't just narrative convenience. She's not a magical prodigy. She's someone who put the hours in and got good. There's an arc where Connie and her mother come to an understanding that involves Connie finally telling her the truth about the crystal gems and the kind of danger she's actually been in. Priyanka Maheswaran's response is not ultimately to forbid it. It's to want to actually know, to understand the risks and be part of the assessment rather than being protected from it, which is a much harder thing for both of them to manage, but the right thing. The show is consistent about information and honesty being better than protection through ignorance. Stevonnie appears in some genuinely unusual contexts across the show. There's a dream sequence that takes place in space, where Stevonnie is alone in a fighter jet navigating a dream about identity and expectation. And it's one of the show's most formally unusual episodes, quiet, strange, more interior than most. It says something about what it feels like to be perceived in a way that doesn't quite fit who you are when you're not being looked at, which is a specific thing to name, and the show names it without explaining it. The relationship between Steven and Connie is one of the few in the show that doesn't have tragedy embedded in it. They're just good to each other, consistently, across the whole run. That sounds like it should be easy to write, and it isn't. Lapis Lazuli appears in the first season in a mirror. That's it. That's the introduction. Steven acquires a magic mirror at a yard sale that the crystal gems think is a communication device, and he uses it to show the mirror things, the sky, the ocean, his face, and one day it starts responding to him, showing him what he shows it, but also showing him things it wants to show him. Someone inside the mirror trying to communicate. Her gem had been cracked during the war. She'd been mistaken for a crystal gem by homeworld soldiers. The show implies she was a homeworld gem who got caught on the wrong side, imprisoned on Earth, and then forgotten when the war ended and everyone was corrupted or fled. She was in that mirror for thousands of years. The specific detail that the show doesn't dwell on, but that settles into you if you think about it. She was aware the whole time, trapped in the mirror, unable to speak, watching. Thousands of years of other gems picking her up and using her as a tool without knowing what she was. Steven is the first person in all of that time to notice that there was someone in there, and that they were trying to say something. When he heals her, crying on the crack in her gem, which is a Steven power, she doesn't really know what to do with the gratitude. She helps him briefly, summoning wings made of water, because her power is hydrokinesis, control of water in any form, and then she leaves, flies home to homeworld. She just wants to go home. That's all she wants. It doesn't go well for her there, for reasons the show unpacks later. She comes back to Earth under duress in a later season, and then, and this is where Lapis becomes one of the show's most honestly rendered characters. She gets stranded here and ends up reluctantly sharing a barn with Peridot. The two of them have no reason to like each other, and every reason to be suspicious of each other, and the show lets the friendship develop in the slow, uncertain way that real friendships sometimes do. They watch TV. Peridot makes her laugh. Lapis makes terrible baseball uniforms for Peridot's fantasy baseball team. It's lovely. But we haven't talked about Malachite yet, and Malachite is the hardest thing about Lapis to discuss. When a homeworld soldier named Jasper arrived at Earth in a later season, aggressive, contemptuous, completely certain she was the most dangerous thing in any room, she was captured by the crystal gems briefly and then escaped. And when she escaped, she proposed a fusion to Lapis. They were both powerful, she said. Together, they'd be unstoppable. Lapis said yes, and then she used the fusion to trap them both at the bottom of the ocean. She held Jasper down there, using the fusion's enormous water-based power against the fusion itself. It was an act of protection, keeping a genuinely dangerous gem contained. And it was also an act of self-punishment, and maybe an act of control in a situation where she'd been controlled for so long. The show treats all of these readings as simultaneously valid without ranking them. They were Malachite for several months, and when they finally unfused, both of them were worse for it. Jasper had been corrupted by the experience. Lapis was present, but diminished. She eventually finds her way back to something like herself, but it's slow. There's a point near the end of the main series where Lapis takes the barn, the shared space she'd made with Peridot, and simply leaves with it, flies off. She needed to go somewhere else, somewhere quiet, somewhere that was entirely hers. And she does it without much explanation. The show doesn't frame this as abandonment. Though Peridot is devastated, it frames it as someone who spent a very long time having no control over her circumstances, making a choice that is entirely her own, even if that choice is difficult for the people who love her. That's an honest piece of writing. The barn period, for all its difficulties, is also where Lapis discovers something like play. She builds enormous sculptures out of nearby objects. She makes a giant tapestry that she uses to express her feelings about Earth in a way she couldn't do in words. The show depicts it as this vast, slightly chaotic thing, obviously sincere, not technically polished. It's art made by someone who isn't sure they're allowed to make art yet. Her relationship with Earth is the most complicated in the whole show, I think, because she spent more of her existence trapped on it than living freely on it. Earth isn't home for Lapis. It's the place where the worst things happen to her. The fact that she forms a genuine attachment to it, anyway, through her time at the barn, is hard-won in a way the show doesn't make explicit. When Homeworld's forces come in the show's final act, Lapis has a choice. She could leave, take the barn, go, not be there for the fight. And for a while, that's what she does. The show doesn't condemn it. She's not obligated to fight for a planet that imprisoned her and a cause that she never chose to join. Her leaving is presented as a valid response to an impossible situation by someone who has been through too much. She comes back. But she comes back on her own terms, which is the difference. Her water powers are worth lingering on for a second because they are genuinely extraordinary at full strength. She once held the entire ocean elevated above the surface of the Earth to power a pair of wings long enough to fly to space. With a cracked gem. The show drops this detail into a season 1 episode and then lets it sit there as a measure of what she's capable of when she's being underestimated. Peridot arrives on Earth as an antagonist and becomes, over the course of roughly a season, one of the warmest characters in the show. The speed of that arc is a bit dizzying if you're watching closely, but the show earns it because it does the work of showing what changes her rather than just announcing that she's changed. She's an Era 2 gem, which means she was manufactured after Homeworld's resources began to decline, and she doesn't have the innate abilities that an Era 1 Peridot would have had. She compensates with technology, limb enhancers that give her extra height and range, a visor that lets her process information and communicate, a toolkit of gem tech that makes her formidable in the field. When she loses these things, bit by bit, through the middle section of her arc, it strips her back to what she actually is, and she has to figure out if that's enough. Her mission on Earth is to check on the cluster, a gem weapon buried in the planet's crust. During the war, Homeworld took the shattered remains of thousands of gems and fused them together, creating a mass of suffering and confused instinct that, if it ever became fully conscious, would be large enough to destroy the planet from the inside. It's a genuinely grim concept, and the show sits with that grimness without turning it into pure horror. The process of Peridot defecting from Homeworld happens over several episodes and involves her being stripped of her technological advantages one by one, until she has nothing to hide behind. And then it happens because of something simple. She gets on a communication channel with Yellow Diamond, and she calls her a clod. It's possibly the funniest moment in the show. Yellow Diamond is one of the most powerful beings in the universe, sitting in her ship, fully expecting compliance, and Peridot, tiny, terrified, shaking, calls her a clod on an open line and then hangs up. And that's it. She's committed. What she discovers after defecting is that she has an ability she didn't know about. Metal manipulation. She can move metal objects with her mind, a power that Era 2 gems aren't supposed to have, and which suggests that something in her, beneath the augmentations and the programming, is a bit unusual. It's a small power. She can move tin cans. She's very proud of it. She takes over the barn that becomes her and Lapis's shared space. She develops strong opinions about a reality TV show involving competitive camping. She makes a meep morp, a piece of abstract art, out of junk she finds around the barn, and it's ugly and sincere and very Peridot. She writes a letter to Yellow Diamond and then destroys it. She finds friends. The thing about Peridot is that she comes from a world that gave her a complete and total worldview, and coming to Earth means that worldview gets dismantled piece by piece, and she has to build a new one in real time, with limited tools, and the people around her are both helping and complicating it. That's a difficult position to be in. She's allowed to be difficult in it. One of her nicest character moments involves her telling Steven that she thinks the crystal gems, objectively, are not very impressive as fighters, but that she likes being around them anyway. She delivers this as a compliment. Steven takes it as one. Camp Pining Hearts is a Canadian teen drama, a real fictional Canadian teen drama within the show's world, and Peridot becomes genuinely invested in it at the barn. She develops strong opinions about which characters should be together, argues with Lapis about the relative merits of the show's central triangle, makes elaborate viewing charts. It's played entirely for the comedy of watching someone encounter human media for the first time and take it much more seriously than most humans do. But it also functions as Peridot's introduction to the idea of stories about relationships between people. She's a technical gem. She thinks in systems, functions, procedures. Camp Pining Hearts gives her a vocabulary for the emotional stuff she doesn't quite have language for, yet. And the show uses this cleverly. Her investment in fictional characters getting together is a proxy for her figuring out what connection and care look like, using a safe external thing before she has to apply the same thinking to herself. The letter she eventually writes to Yellow Diamond, trying to explain why she's not coming back, is something she destroys before sending. The show never shows the contents, but the act of writing it, trying to find the words for "I understand now that you were wrong about everything, including me," is its own form of process. Peridot's meep morps, her abstract art pieces made from barn junk, where it become a recurring motif. They're ugly and entirely sincere, and Garnet's calm, genuine assessment of them as real art is one of those moments where the show says something about creativity that it delivers so quietly you might miss it. Art doesn't have to be beautiful to be real. Effort and sincerity are enough. Peridot made something because she needed to make something, and that was sufficient. Here's something the show reveals partway through its run that manages to be both absurd and genuinely moving at the same time. Blue Diamond maintained a habitat in space on one of her ships where she kept humans from Earth. A carefully controlled environment designed to look like a small paradise. Greenery, open sky, gentle architecture. People living in it who had been taken from Earth thousands of years ago. Their descendants now multiple generations removed from anyone who remembered being taken. The humans in the zoo, and the show does call it a zoo directly and treats that name as accurate and relevant, have their own culture. They don't know about the outside world. They have a ritual called the choosening, in which they are paired with a partner by a device that responds to their pheromones, essentially deciding who belongs with whom by biological compatibility, rather than by anything the humans themselves choose. When Greg is taken there by Blue Diamond, who brings him partly out of loneliness, partly because she genuinely believes she's giving him something good by putting him somewhere that looks like Earth, it's the show making visible something it's been building slowly. The Diamond's care for humans is real, in a way. Blue Diamond genuinely grieves for the humans as she grieves for Pink Diamond. She preserved them. She visits them. And none of that changes the fact that it's a cage. And the humans in it don't know they're in one. And the moment someone from outside tells them that, the whole careful construction collapses. The off-colors are a separate homeworld secret, located in an abandoned kindergarten underground. They're gems who were considered defective by homeworld standards. A sapphire who sees the past instead of the future. Padparadsha, who delivers her observations slightly too late, which the show plays with great warmth. A pair of conjoined rubies, the rutile twins. a fusion of wildly different gem types who has been together so long she's become something entirely her own, Fluorite, who speaks very slowly and thoughtfully and is in a relationship with several other gems simultaneously, which the show presents entirely without judgment. And Rhodonite, a fusion of a ruby and a pearl who clearly loves being what she is, even though she's terrified. They've been surviving underground for an unspecified but clearly very long time, hiding from Homeworld's authorities, existing in a system that considers their existence a problem. Lars ends up down there with them. Lars from Beach City, Sadie's not quite boyfriend, the one who always seemed like he was performing a version of cool that he didn't quite believe in. And the show does something interesting with him. He's afraid, and he stays anyway. And that changes him in a way that's permanent and good. He's one of the show's minor characters who gets a real arc and earns it. The detail that ties the zoo and the off-colors together is this. Homeworld's concept of care and Homeworld's concept of rejection are both, in different ways, about control. The humans in the zoo are controlled with comfort. The off-colors are controlled with fear. The system doesn't actually care about anyone's well-being in the sense of asking what they need. It maintains. The humans in the zoo have names, given to them or developed organically, the show is a bit vague on this, and a settled social world. A young woman named Nora is someone Greg encounters and who is clearly thriving by the standards of the habitat. The humans there seem, by external measure, happy. That's the uncomfortable thing about it. The cage is comfortable. The people in it don't know they're missing anything. Greg, arriving from outside, is the disruption. He tells them about Earth, about sky that goes on forever, about weather, about sleeping in a van by choice. He's not sure, at first, whether telling them is the right thing to do. The show doesn't entirely resolve that question. Some of the zoo humans eventually come to Earth after everything changes. There's a reference to this in Steven Universe Future, them adjusting to the wide open world and finding it overwhelming in the way that genuinely large spaces can be overwhelming to someone who grew up in a contained one. What Homeworld thought it was doing with the zoo says something important about the nature of care in the Diamond's hands. Blue Diamond genuinely believed the humans were well cared for. She'd preserved them across thousands of years, maintained their environment, kept them comfortable. By any external gem standard, that was an act of consideration. The concept that the humans might want to be asked, might want to choose, might want incompatible and contradictory things and still prefer that to a pleasant cage, that's not something the Homeworld framework had space for. Steven's whole arc is, in miniature, about building a framework that has that space, about asking rather than assuming, about treating what someone says they want as meaningful, even when you think you know better. This is the reveal the whole show has been building to. It comes in an episode called A Single Pale Rose, which is the third to last episode of Season 4, and it's structured as a memory dive, Steven entering Pearl's mind to find a specific memory, going deeper and deeper through layered recollections until he finds the thing Pearl has been carrying for all this time. Before we get there, it's worth walking through what the show had been quietly building for seasons. The Crystal Gems Pearl is the only Pearl we know of who fights, who leads, who has opinions and a history and a relationship with another gem that was clearly something more than service. Standard Pearls don't do that. Standard Pearls stand beside their owner and exist beautifully. Rose Quartz's healing powers, her shield, her connection to plants and life, these are not quartz-level abilities. Quartzes are soldiers, strong, durable fighters. They don't heal. They don't make things grow. They don't project shields capable of withstanding diamond-level attacks. The trial in Homeworld is where the show starts to pry the lid off directly. Steven is brought to Homeworld to be held responsible for Rose Quartz's alleged shattering of Pink Diamond. His defense lawyer, Blue Zircon, a small, precise, genuinely competent gem who deserves more recognition than she usually gets in fan discussions, actually finds holes in the official story. Pink Diamond was shattered outside her palanquin in front of her full entourage by a single Rose Quartz in broad view of everyone. How? No quartz could get close enough to a diamond to do that. No quartz would have been within reach. The entourage would have intervened. unless someone already close to Pink Diamond did it. Someone who would have been beside the palanquin without raising suspicion. Someone like a Pearl. The actual reveal when it comes is something different from what the trial arc suggests. The memory shows Pink Diamond and Pearl together. Pearl transforming herself into Rose Quartz's likeness. Pink Diamond poofing herself. Pearl quickly hiding the gem and leaving behind fake shards made from compressed dirt. The whole death was staged. Pink Diamond is not shattered. She was never shattered. She became Rose Quartz permanently. The form she'd created to walk among her subjects became her actual self, and Pink Diamond, the title, the history, the responsibility, ceased to exist. Or tried to. What this means is that the war was started by Pink Diamond to escape being Pink Diamond. And the fake death was the final piece of that escape. And only Pearl has known the truth since the moment it happened. The show doesn't deliver this as a triumphant twist. It delivers it as something heavy and complicated. Because Rose made this choice, and then she left the crystal gems to spend millennia believing they had killed a diamond, believing there were consequences coming for that, believing that Rose Quartz was who Rose said she was. Garnet didn't know. Amethyst didn't know. Bismuth, trapped in her bubble, certainly didn't know. They were all, in various ways, living inside a story that had been constructed without their knowledge or consent. It's not that Pink Diamond's reasons weren't real. They were. She genuinely wanted to protect the Earth and couldn't find another way to do it. But the show is honest that wanting something for real reasons doesn't mean the method was without cost to everyone else involved. I've had years to sit with this reveal, and I still find it one of the most affecting pieces of narrative construction in recent animated television. Not because it's a surprise, though it is, but because of how completely it recontextualizes everything that came before. Every scene with Pearl, every moment of Garnet's quiet authority, every time Amethyst talked about feeling like she didn't belong, all of it sits differently after. The aftermath of the reveal is dispersed across several episodes, and the show doesn't rush it, which is the right call. Each crystal gem processes it differently. Garnet unfuses when she finds out. That's the measure of how significant it is. Garnet, who has been Garnet continuously for thousands of years, splits apart and has to become Ruby and Sapphire separately for a little while, before she can come back together. Because what the reveal means, for Garnet specifically, is that the war she and Ruby and Sapphire chose, that the entire reason they are who they are, was started by Pink Diamond playing a complicated game. Garnet was inspired originally by Rose Quartz's belief in her. Now she knows that the person who inspired her was a diamond, performing a belief she wasn't sure she entirely held. That's a specific kind of betrayal, different from what Pearl feels about it, different from what Amethyst feels. Garnet needed to be apart before she could be together again. Amethyst takes it in the quieter way she often takes difficult things, processes it sideways through action. She's also a kindergarten gem, made on Earth, which means her relationship to the whole thing is different. She didn't fight in the war. She doesn't have the weight of Rose's leadership in the same way. What she has is the knowledge that the place she came from was a colony of someone who was secretly the person they were all living with. And that's strange, and strange is something Amethyst has practiced sitting with. The reveal also recontextualizes Rose's video to Steven, the one she recorded before he was born. She's not just a warrior passing a legacy to her son. She's a diamond who decided to become someone else entirely, who found the identity of Rose Quartz more true to herself than her original one, and who then, having chosen a human life and a human love, found that even Rose Quartz was something she was ready to let go of. Steven is the end of all those identities, someone new. The series finale of Steven Universe is a 44-minute special called Change Your Mind, and it exists to do one very specific and very difficult thing. It asks whether the most powerful, most isolated, most self-convinced being in the entire universe can be reached. White Diamond is the one the show has been holding back. Yellow and blue have been progressively revealed as complicated, grieving, capable of change. White has been a presence behind everything, the standard everyone performs against, the absolute against which all deviation is measured, without being an actual character until the finale forces her to be one. Her specific power is mind control, essentially. She can reach into a gem and take it over, replacing their personality with a blank compliance, a version of them that agrees with everything and has no interior life. She calls this helping. She genuinely believes this is a kindness, removing the messy, inconsistent, suffering self and replacing it with something perfect and pain-free. The show has been quietly doing something with this framing across the series, showing us characters who erase parts of themselves to function, who perform a role so completely that they lose track of what's underneath it, who mistake being manageable for being well. White Diamond is the endpoint of that trajectory. She made herself into the thing that couldn't be threatened or hurt because she eliminated everything that could be. She took Pink Diamond's original pearl, the one Pink had before our pearl, the one who was injured when Pink had a destructive outburst, and put her under control. The pearl we meet in the later series, the one who serves White Diamond with wide eyes and a painted smile, used to love someone. She doesn't anymore because she can't. That detail is one of the show's most quietly terrible moments. Steven getting through to White Diamond involves a combination of things, but at the core of it is something the show has been building as Steven's particular strength. He doesn't stop trying to reach people. He doesn't decide someone is beyond changing and write them off. He keeps showing up, keeps trying to make contact, keeps treating even the most terrifying person as someone who could be different. The moment that matters most. White Diamond removes Steven's gem from his body to prove that he's just Pink Diamond in another form. The gem emerges and becomes its own figure, Pink Steven, later, though here it's just a silent presence. And Steven's body is still there, human, alive, separate. And that separation is the evidence. He is not Pink Diamond. He is not Rose Quartz. He is his own thing entirely, made of both but identical to neither. White Diamond has to reckon with that. The show gives her time to do it. The corrupting light is reversed in the finale. All four diamonds together, their power combined in healing rather than destruction, doing what Rose spent her life trying to do alone. Every corrupted gem on Earth is healed. The bubbles open. People who haven't been people in thousands of years come back to themselves. It's one of the most genuinely emotional sequences the show produces, and it earns it. White Diamond's ship, called the Planet Killer, is the visual centerpiece of the finale, and the show renders it with a kind of scale that makes you feel the weight of what Steven is walking into. The thing is enormous. It's bigger than most things the show has depicted as enormous. Walking toward it with no plan except keep trying to reach her is exactly the kind of thing that is either brave or foolish, and the show lets it be both. The sequence where White takes control of the crystal gems, Pearl, Amethyst, Garnet, and uses them as a wall between Steven and herself is one of the show's more formally striking choices. Steven has to face his family, his people, emptied of themselves, their faces wearing the same blank pleasantness, their voices saying things that don't belong to them. It's played quietly rather than as a horror sequence, and that quiet makes it worse. He doesn't fight them. He talks to them, calls them by name, keeps trying to find the person underneath the override. What breaks through is small and human and entirely right for the show. Amethyst making eye contact, a flicker. Pearl trembling with the effort of saying his name. Garnet's hands, which were built to punch things hard and with love, slowly closing around his. White Diamond's control is enormous and old and absolutely certain of itself, and it is undone by people caring too much to stay under. There's also the pink pearl thread, the original pearl that White had been controlling. And her recovery in the epilogue series is its own quieter arc. She's given the nickname Volleyball by Steven, because she has a gem on her forehead that bounces light like a volleyball in the right conditions. Finding a new name, a new identity, for someone who was effectively someone else, for thousands of years is not a fast thing, but she's there, and she's working on it. Steven Universe. The movie came out in September 2019, set 2 years after the end of the original series. Steven is 16. Things are good. He'd just told the diamonds he wanted to come home to Earth and live his life, and they'd agreed. And he'd gone back to Beach City expecting peace. The peace lasts approximately 3 minutes before something falls out of the sky. Spinel was created thousands of years ago to be Pink Diamond's companion. Her design is explicitly rubber hose animation. The 1930s cartoon aesthetic, all-round shapes and smooth curves, and a face built for comedy. She's acrobatic, endlessly adaptable, made to be a playmate. Her gem is in her chest like a heart. Pink took her to a garden on Homeworld, told her to wait, said she'd be right back, and then left to go deal with being given a colony. And never came back. Spinel waited for all of them. Every one of those years. She stood in the garden, waiting. Because Pink's last instruction was, stay and wait. And she had no way to update that instruction without Pink coming back to give her a new one. She didn't move. She didn't know that Pink was gone. She didn't know that Pink had become Rose Quartz, had started a war, had had a son, had died in the sense that mattered. She just waited. She found out when a broadcast from Steven, this cheerful, well-intentioned announcement that went out across the galaxy, inviting all gems to come to a better Earth, reached the garden. And she understood in that moment everything that had happened without her. What she becomes after that is the film's central question. She's not evil in a conventional sense. She doesn't have a grand plan. She doesn't want power. She wants to hurt the thing that Pink cared about more than her, which is Earth, and she wants Steven, who was Pink's son, who was the thing Pink chose over her, to understand what it felt like to be left. There's a scene where she explains in song why she hates him, and it's one of the most effective villain introductions I've seen in animation. Not because she's frightening, exactly, though she is. Her fighting style is grotesque. All the playful rubber hose movement turned into something predatory. But because she's right. Pink Diamond left her alone in a garden and never looked back. That happened. That hurt is real. Steven doesn't know what to say to her at first. He can't apologize for his mother in a way that means anything because the wound is so large. And he didn't do it. And he's also genuinely the person who most understands the specific quality of having been left things by Pink Diamond that you didn't ask for. The resolution isn't healing exactly. It's a beginning. Yellow and Blue Diamond take Spinel to Homeworld, to a place where she might be able to figure out who she is outside of that garden. It's the most the film can honestly offer. Her design shifting over the course of the film, from the sharp, jagged, angular Spinel at the beginning to something softer by the end, is one of those things the show does quietly and beautifully, where the physical form reflects the interior. And one detail that sits with me. Her gem is shaped like a heart. Pink Diamond's last companion, the one she left behind, was carrying a heart-shaped stone the entire time. The film's animation style is noticeably different from the series. It has a higher budget and a slightly smoother quality, and the opening sequence in particular has this rich, theatrical feel that reflects Steven's idealized sense of what his life is going to be. Bright, clean, everyone together, everything resolved. It's deliberately beautiful as a setup for what's about to land in his garden. The injector Spinel brings is a significant piece of the plot's mechanics. It's poisoning the Earth's crust, draining it. A kindergarten process in miniature, applied to a living planet. Steven and the crystal gems have to fix it. And part of that process involves a reset device that Spinel uses on Amethyst, Pearl, and Garnet, wiping their recent memories, sending them back to who they were before they knew Steven, which is, for each of them, a genuinely earlier version of themselves. Pearl before Greg, Amethyst before Beach City, Garnet in a more guarded configuration. Steven has to reintroduce himself to people who loved him, who don't know they love him yet, and earn that love again in the space of a film. It's a mature point for an animated film, and the film earns it. Steven Universe Future premiered in December 2019 and ran for 20 episodes, finishing in March 2020. It's described as an epilogue series, and it is, but it's also something sharper and stranger than that word suggests. The premise is the aftermath. The war is over. The corrupted gems are healed. Homeworld is changing. Steven got what he fought for, and the crystal gems have a whole new world to figure out. And he's 16 and supposed to be enjoying this. He isn't, quite. The show spends its first half or so doing something that looks like a series of standalone episodes, checking in on various characters, seeing how they're adjusting to the new piece, and underneath that is a slow accumulation of unease around Steven specifically. He's helping everyone. He's good at helping everyone. He has answers. He shows up. And somewhere in there, he stops being a person and becomes a function, and he doesn't notice. His powers start doing things they shouldn't. Pink light, uncontrolled. Physical changes, growing taller suddenly, which frightens him. Involuntary manifestations when he's stressed. Dr. Maheswaran is the first person to name what's happening. His body is responding to emotional stimuli as if they're physical threats, producing a stress response calibrated for emergencies in a context where there aren't emergencies anymore. The medical term she uses is post-traumatic stress. The specific thing is that Steven has been through enormous amounts of genuine danger, and also, throughout all of it, has been the caretaker, has been the one holding it together, has never really had permission to fall apart, because there was always something more urgent than his falling apart. And now there isn't. And his nervous system doesn't know what to do with that. There's an episode called Volleyball, where he meets Pink Diamond's original Pearl, his mother's first companion, the one White Diamond took, and learns about ways his mother caused harm that he'd never known about. Pink Diamond's destructive power was something she couldn't always control, and the Pearl in that episode carries a physical scar from it. Our Pearl didn't know this had happened. Nobody did. Pink had a whole set of consequences she didn't tell anyone about. There's an episode called Fragments, where Steven trains with Jasper, who came back after the healing. She's the only character who matches his new, more erratic power level, and she pushes him harder than anyone else does. And in a moment of genuine rage, he accidentally shatters her. Then he reverses it using a power he didn't know he had, bringing gems back from shattering, which is not a thing that was supposed to be possible. He doesn't tell anyone. He couldn't. The second half of the series builds to a breakdown, and the show doesn't soften it. Steven turns pink and enormous. He can't hear anyone. He's furious and terrified, and everyone who loves him is trying to reach him. And he is, for a while, genuinely unreachable. What gets through is not a solution, not a cure. It's just his people, all of them, outside, waiting, saying his name, saying we love you and we're here and we're not going anywhere. He doesn't fix himself. He lets himself be found. After the breakdown resolves, he does something that's presented simply, and that I think is the most emotionally mature beat in the whole franchise. He tells everyone he loves them, and he gets in a van and he drives away. Not forever. Not as an ending. But as someone who has spent his whole life being what everyone else needed him to be, and who finally needs to go, find out who he is when nobody needs anything. He takes his father's old tour van. He has his phone. He'll call. But right now, he has to go. It's a very specific kind of brave. Admitting you need to leave in order to come back. And the show trusts the audience to understand that this is not failure. It's the first thing he's ever done entirely for himself. There's an episode early in Future called Little Graduation, where Lars and Sadie are both moving on. Lars off to space, Sadie joining a band, both of them building lives that are distinctly not the ones they had in Beach City. Steven is happy for them, genuinely. And also the episode is called Little Graduation, which is the kind of title that tells you exactly what you're in for. The Gem School at Little Homeworld is one of the epilogue's central locations, a place where the healed gems and the off-colors and various others are learning how to exist in a world that doesn't tell them what to be. There's something very specific about watching characters who spent their whole lives defined by function have to figure out what they want. Bismuth, freed from her bubble, becomes a blacksmith who makes things for the joy of making them rather than for war. The Rudel twins are working out how to be two people who share a body and both have opinions. Padparacha is just delightful. She's always telling you something that already happened, but there's such warmth in her that it doesn't matter. Steven's role at Little Homeworld is to help, which is the problem. He's very good at helping. He has answers, and he gives them, and the gems improve, and he moves on to the next one. He's treating emotional healing like a gem mission. Identify the problem, apply the solution, move on. He doesn't notice that he's doing this partly to avoid sitting with his own problems. And when people around him try to tell him he needs help, he absorbs that as a task to complete, rather than a thing to receive. Growing Pains, the episode where Dr. Maheswaran examines him properly, is one of the best episodes of the whole franchise. It's 20 minutes of a doctor asking a child how he's doing, and finding out that he's been absorbing catastrophic amounts of physical and emotional stress since before he was a teenager, and that nobody has ever sat down with him and said the thing she says, which is that none of that was okay, and it makes sense that he's struggling. He cries. Of course he cries. Rebecca Sugar is the first woman and the first non-binary person to create an animated series for Cartoon Network. She created it partly from a personal place, the show's exploration of identity, of not fitting the category you were assigned, of loving someone in a way that doesn't map neatly onto existing frameworks, draws from her own experience. Knowing that makes certain things about the show click into place in a way they might not otherwise. The show is interested in identity above almost everything else. Every major character, and most of the minor ones, has some version of the question, who am I if not what I was made to be? Garnet is a fusion that was never supposed to exist, choosing to exist anyway. Pearl is a servant who became something else, and spent thousands of years figuring out what that meant. Amethyst is a kindergarten gem who was supposed to be part of an army that no longer exists. Steven is the inheritor of his mother's choices and has to figure out where she ends and he begins. The fusion mechanic is the show's most elegant metaphysical tool. A fusion formed from genuine harmony and love is stable, cohesive, greater than the sum of its parts. A fusion formed under duress or from manipulation, or from a relationship that doesn't have the honesty it needs, is unstable, unpredictable, potentially dangerous. The show uses this to say things about relationships, all kinds, that would be difficult to say directly. Malachite is what a fused trauma looks like. Garnet is what a commitment looks like. Stevani is what it feels like to be truly seen by someone. Generational trauma is the other major thread. Steven literally inherits his mother's unfinished business, her corrupted gems, her hidden past, her unresolved relationships, her wars. He was handed consequences for choices he never made, and the show is honest that this is unfair and also just true. You don't get to choose your inheritance. You can choose what you do with it. The music deserves its own mention because the show uses songs as its primary tool for emotional revelation. When a character sings, they're usually saying the thing they can't say in spoken dialogue. Stronger Than You is Garnet stating her existence as a thesis. It's over, isn't it? Is Pearl's grief distilled to its essential form? Here Comes a Thought is a meditation on anxiety that I've seen described by more than one person as the most useful thing they've watched for their mental health. They're genuinely good songs, not just good for a cartoon, good. The show also believes, consistently and without apology, that small human things matter as much as large cosmic things. The beach, the big donut, Greg's van, Connie's sword practice in the backyard. These get the same care as the gem history and the interstellar politics, because the show's argument is that they have the same weight. A boy eating ice cream on a beach is as important as a diamond adjusting her worldview. Maybe more. The universe is made of small things, and the small things are worth protecting. And the show believes people can change. Every single antagonist who survives is changed by the end, to varying degrees. White diamond, yellow diamond, blue diamond, jasper, peridot. Not perfectly, not completely, not without cost or time, but changed. The show holds this position without being naive about it. Some characters don't change in time to prevent harm. Some changes are too small, too late. But the show never stopped believing the change was possible. That's what it was always about, I think. The belief that the world you're in is worth staying for, that the people around you are worth trying to understand, and that you are allowed to be something other than what you were made to be. Said through a boy with a magic shield and a quartz on his stomach, living in a house built into a cliff above the ocean. Not a bad delivery mechanism, all things considered. The show's treatment of gender is worth addressing directly, because it's one of the areas where it was genuinely ahead of much of the television around it. Gems don't have gender. They use she/her pronouns as a default because that's what the human characters reach for, but among themselves the concept doesn't apply. The show uses this to explore what it means to exist outside a binary, what it feels like to be a body that doesn't correspond to any existing category, and what love looks like when it's not anchored to the normative framework of two particular kinds of people. Ruby and Sapphire's relationship, two feminine presenting gems who are in love and who fuse into a being who is also feminine presenting, was one of the first depictions of a same gender relationship on a children's cartoon that was allowed to be explicitly a relationship with a proposal and a wedding, rather than a close friendship that everyone understood, but that the show had to carefully not name. The show fought for that explicitness, and won. And the episodes that contain it are generous and warm in a way that reflects how much they meant to the people who made them. The songs the show uses as emotional peaks deserve a bit more attention. Stronger Than You is Garnet's answer to a fusion that was formed from manipulation and coercion. She faces it and tells it what she is. And what she is a choice, made every day by two people who love each other. It's an anthem about consent and stability and what real love looks like. It's over, isn't it? Is Pearl in the rain. Watching Greg and Rose through a window. Understanding that what she had with Rose was ending. That Rose chose something Pearl couldn't offer. Here Comes a Thought plays over a sequence where Garnet and Stephen meditate together, and it names intrusive thoughts, the way anxiety works, the way you can sit with something difficult without being consumed by it, gently, in the way a child could understand and an adult could need. Rebecca Sugar has said the show was informed by her own experiences with identity, with relationships, with the specific kind of person you become when you spend years making yourself smaller to fit a space you were assigned. The show is, in that sense, a form of autobiography translated into an alien civilization and a boy at a beach. And knowing that doesn't reduce it. It expands it. So that's the world. 8,000 years of it, more or less, from the founding of homeworld society, through the Gem War, through 5,000 years of 3 women and a lion keeping the earth safe. All the way to a teenager getting in a van and driving somewhere the story doesn't follow him. There's more, always more. Characters I've barely touched who deserve videos of their own. Jasper's full arc in Future, for instance. She trains with Steven and loses, and finds, in that defeat, the first honest thing that's happened to her in a very long time. She bows to him afterward, calls him my diamond, which is the highest thing in her vocabulary. The show doesn't present this as her being fixed. It presents it as a beginning. A soldier who has only ever understood herself through winning, finding out there are other ways to measure a life. Bismuth, freed from her bubble after thousands of years, becoming a blacksmith who makes things for the joy of it. Not weapons, not instruments of war, beautiful things, useful things, things she gives to people she likes. The joy she takes in her work is enormous and uncomplicated, and she deserves every bit of it. The cluster, down in the Earth's crust, a mass of shards from gems shattered during the war, fused together in suffering. Stephen communicates with it through a dream, finds it frightened and confused, and when it understands that it isn't going to be used as a weapon, profoundly relieved. It retreats into itself, keeps itself contained, takes care of the world from underneath. That's not a minor detail. That's the show saying that even the most discarded, the most broken, the most weaponized thing can choose to become something else. The show has a density of detail that rewards rewatching in a way that very few things manage. Details that seemed incidental in season 1 become load-bearing by season 5. The way Pearl's hand moves when she talks about Rose. the specific silence Garnet uses when she knows something she's not going to tell you yet. The way Amethyst shapeshifts when she thinks no one is looking, trying on different forms briefly, seeing if any of them fit better. If any part of tonight made you curious enough to go back and watch, or curious enough to start watching for the first time, the show is genuinely worth your time. Most episodes are under 15 minutes. You could watch the whole series in a good long weekend and come out the other side slightly changed in some way you wouldn't be able to name immediately. There are more videos like this planned. Other worlds built with this kind of care. Other shows that have more in them than the surface suggests. If that's something you'd like, the subscribe button will see to it. But for now, the Crystal Temple is up on the cliff above Beach City with the lights off. Greg Universe is somewhere in his van, probably listening to something good on the radio. Probably thinking about Rose in the quiet way he's been thinking about Rose for 20 years. Connie is reading. Pearl is in her room running through a battle formation that ended 5,000 years ago, maintaining it carefully, keeping it ready. Garnet is on the beach. She's always on the beach. And the ocean is doing what it does, rolling in, rolling out, not caring about any of this in the way that oceans don't. And the stars are the same stars you'd see from Homeworld, from anywhere, just from a different angle. That's a nice thought.